back to Just Energy Radio with Dr. Rita Louise.
Hello and welcome back to Just Energy Radio. I'm your host, Dr. Rita Louise, and thank you all for staying tuned to the second hour of the show. This hour, we're going to be speaking to Maria Wheatley about her new book, The Elongated Skulls of Stonehenge. Now, doesn't that sound fascinating? Just Energy Radio is brought to you by soulhealer.com, where you can find out about all the products and services I offer. It's also brought to you by the Institute of Applied Energetics. That's www.appliedenergeticsinstitute.com, where you can jumpstart your intuition today by downloading their free 50-page guide. That's www.appliedenergeticsinstitute.com. And I just want to let everyone that's listening to the show know that for this month, the whole month of October, my book, Dark Angels, An Insider's Guide to Ghost Spirits and Attached Entities, is on sale on Amazon.com. It's for the Kindle version, $2.99. $2.99 all month. Dark Angels, An Insider's Guide. Okay, let me tell you a little bit about Maria, and we will bring her on. Maria Wheatley is an accomplished author of books on sacred sites and dowsing. She has researched the esoteric design canons of prehistoric sites, Druidic ceremonial enclosures, and the Knights Templar for many years. Maria has studied Neolithic Britain and Bronze Age prehistory with the University of Bath, and alongside other professionals, Maria combines her knowledge of archaeology and earth energies with state-of-the-art equipment to locate and detect the hidden frequencies the earth emits. Her webpage is theaveryexperience.co.uk. Please welcome the author of The Elongated Skulls of Stonehenge, Maria Wheatley. Hi, Maria. How are you?
Hi, Rita. I'm very well, thank you.
Well, I am just so excited about your new book coming out because it just is in the channels coming out, which we'll talk a little bit about that at the end. But I think it is so exciting because when most people think of elongated skulls, I think their attention immediately goes to Peru, the Paracas skulls that Brian Forrester has brought forward so dramatically. And to find out that there are similar skulls, which we're going to learn more about, in England and even in and around Stonehenge is so exciting. So what kind of led you to this area? How did you stumble upon this?
Yes, that's a good start and a good question. I was looking into long barrows that surround Stonehenge, and they're massive long mounds that the ancient Neolithic ancestors, round about, let's say, 5,000 years ago, constructed in the ancient landscape. So I was looking into this style of monuments, the long mounds, and I noticed that in the Stonehenge area, there was one exceptional sized mound that was the largest in northwest Europe. It is gigantic. It's also situated in an area which we call the Salisbury Plain. And the Salisbury Plain in the UK is 25 miles by 25 miles, roughly speaking, and is owned and managed by the Military of Defence. So it's a very sensitive area, and there's parts of the plain which you can access, and there are parts which are not. It's a bit like your Area 51. It's a non-permitted military landscape. So anyway, I was investigating that, and I just had a kind of intuition and sense that there was something very special about this mound. So I went there. It was a day when you could openly visit it, and I led on the mound, and suddenly I sensed something very different about the mound. So I thought, I've got to investigate this. So I began to investigate the monument and realized that instead of being a communal style monument, which is common for long barrows, that means lots of skulls and long bones of the Neolithic ancestors used to be placed inside the mound. This one just contained one person, which was very, very unusual for the Neolithic period. So I decided to track down the skull, which was very difficult. It was, like a roundabout of museums and universities to try and track down. But I was literally on the case. I thought, who is this person and why are they so important? And eventually I located the skull and, more importantly, the archaeological reports about that area. And when I began to read the archaeological reports, I realized that they were talking about elongated skulls. The measurements, not necessarily like the cone heads of Paracas, but very long Egyptian Maltese style long skulls. And I thought, this is different. And I started to get report after report and realized that this had been kind of suppressed, I feel, by the archaeological community.
How old were these reports?
The reports went back to what we call our Victorian period, which was when the excavators first excavated the mounds. So we could say they go back to the 19th century. And who was responsible for digging the barrows were basically rich people then, rich people that were landowners and could dig where they wanted to. But round about sort of the mid-1900s, there was a doctor of the area, and he was looking into the nature of skulls. He was, measuring them, and it was becoming more scientific. And it was his reports that I was reading. And he was stating that they were very different to our round, more European skulls, as he called them, and they stood out. And that's what he was investigating.
I find it very interesting that your research takes you again to that kind of turn of the century research where my feeling is they research something, they make an observation, they document it, and then it's later on it gets covered up. I've seen that over and over again.
Yes, I agree fully. The work had been done. It was, a good scientific report. Then, round about the 1920s, the 1930s, before the Second World War, there was another look into those barrow reports that had previously been done, and it was decided that they would change the idea about what we call the Beaker people that came to England in 2500 BC. Instead of saying that they were, Europeans looking with rounder skulls, they just called them, labeled it the Beaker culture. And from that moment forth, the Beaker culture was just described without a difference to the ancient British finds. So there was now no understanding of what went before. It was decided that it was called the Beaker culture, and I think that's where the mistake was made.
I guess I'm kind of missing it. So was this Beaker culture the group that had the elongated skulls?
No, the Beaker culture were more round-skulled Europeans, and they were thought to have come to England in a migration period around about 2500 BC, and were responsible for erecting the megalithic stone circles. And the ancient Britons were the more of the elongated skulls.
Okay.
That's what was thought, but it's now understood that the two cultures were living side by side long before the Beaker culture was alleged to come here. That's now being reevaluated.
Yeah, because, well, you're giving a date of 2000 BC, give or take. And we know that, some of the, I'm having some of the other structures, how's that, other than Stonehenge and this maybe the Circle in Avery, are much older, like the dolmen and some of the things that are in more northern England, Scotland, I thought were, like 5,000 BC. Were much older than this immigration of people to build Stonehenge.
Yes, you're right. Some of the monuments are very, very old and go back to the very early Neolithic, 6,000 years ago. And so it's like a big catch-up and re-evaluation of what's going on in the south of England. But it's quite interesting as well that recently, although it's not documented widely by the media yet, there has been some standing stones discovered around the Stonehenge environs, which are probably Mesolithic, which are probably now pushing the timeline back to about 8,000 BC. That's being reevaluated. I feel here, Rita, Louise, that there is such a different understanding of the Neolithic period that the archaeological community can no longer say the blanket date of 5,000 years ago. The evidence is staring them in the face. They have found a standing stone that probably dates back to the Mesolithic period of up to 8,000, 9,000, I think more like 10,000 years ago.
Well, it seems like recently dates just keep getting pushed back and back and back, which makes me happy personally. And I'm glad to hear that, because it means that people are starting to step out of that little Bible box that was constructed, that we've been trying to squish everything into such a short period of time.
Yes, and I feel that over here it will soon be commonplace to say that most of the monuments are far, far older. And the younger archaeologists, they're on the same page.
Well, that's good to know. So let's go back to the concept of these barrows. And so my feeling is, and correct me if I'm wrong, that these barrows are kind of like the mounds that you find in the Americas? Kind of? I mean, talk to me about the barrows. What were they constructed for? Are they monuments? Are they graves? Talk to me about that a little bit.
Sure. The long barrows or the long mounds are the earliest monuments in the UK landscape. They are long mounds. They're not like the round barrows of Ohio, for example. They're much longer in shape, and they're like a rooftop that on top of houses that you get. They're kind of like a rooftop in the landscape. They're very unique around the Stonehenge area as well, and they're very different to other long barrows in the UK. So the Stonehenge barrows are kind of very long, very elongated, and they can be up to 390 feet long by about sort of 20 or so feet wide. They were constructed for their primary use. Nobody really knows what went on. But towards the end of their usage, if you will, the skulls and the long bones were placed inside the chambers at the end of their kind of use. And then they were sealed off for all time. So they're very enigmatic. Why were they constructed? Why did they have chambers? And then why were bones placed in them? And why were they sealed off? And by sealing off, what I mean was, across England at the same time, round about the Stone Circle time when Stonehenge was being constructed and Avery was being constructed and all of the stone circles are being constructed, these long mounds were infilled with earth and jam-packed with earth and sealed off with big stones for all time. Every single long barrow in the UK. And then the stone circles came into being. So we don't really know what was going on in the first phase of long barrows. They could have been used as initiation chambers, as oracle chambers. You know, theories do abound. Then in the last phase, the bones were placed in them, and then they were finally sealed off for all time.
Well, I could make some comments toward that, but I'll just... All right, I'll make the comments. You know, there is this whole thing about death and dying that ancient cultures had, this huge fear of it, and doing things with skeletons and skeletal remains in their personal property, that sealing them up, you know, and not like in the Egyptian way, but, you know, like getting rid of them. Here, we're just going to stick them over there so they won't bother us anymore. But...
yeah, these long mounds, it's noted that probably housed inside them the more of the elite of the ancient Britain. So they were probably maybe royal graves, the graves of priests. And you also had flat graves at that time, a bit like what we do now, you know, buried deep in the earth. So there was kind of two styles of burial going on. So the long mounds, it's thought of to be the royal and the priesthood in the landscape.
Any grave goods associated with the bodies or the bones?
From the initial archaeological, it doesn't seem to be that at all. It's just the long bones of normally of the leg and the skull, and that's it. No other bones.
All right, that's kind of weird.
It is, because to have a full skeleton in there was deemed quite unusual, and occasionally that happened in the English landscape, but that is, you know, far and few between. It was normally the skulls and the long bones.
And in these enclosures, there have been multiple skulls, multiple long bones.
Yes,
found.
They were exactly. They were communal. And within the chambers, within the long mounds, the skulls of people and the bones of people were placed.
Okay, so let's go back to the elongated skull, because you spoke about this woman who had an elongated skull, and I have a couple of questions about her. But in these communal places of interment, were they also elongated skulls, or was there a population of elongated skulls uncovered in that mix?
Within the Salisbury Plain, yes. That it looks like most of the long mounds on Salisbury Plain encircling the site of Stonehenge that we all are familiar with was an elongated, probably ruling community.
Okay. And if you, and this is kind of a challenging question because I don't know if you've gotten this far in your research, if you step outside of this, I'm going to say geographical diameter, do you find one elongated skulls in other areas? And if you do find them in other areas, is there a distinct drop off or a change in style and features that tell you that this was a community here at Stonehenge that had these rites and traditions of elongating their skulls?
You do seem to find the odd elongated skull in the southwest of England, in other areas, but predominantly it appears at the moment that they seem to be more around the Stonehenge environs. That said, I was looking at another archaeological report just the other week, actually, and it seems that across Europe as well, there was elongated skulls found, for example, in Prague, in the Czech Republic. So maybe that it was far more common than just the Stonehenge area. To try and trace down archaeological reports is quite difficult. But the ones that I have traced down, because I'm very fortunate to live near a big office called the National Monuments Record Office, which houses all of the archaeological reports of Great Britain in one building. So, but you have to go through a lot to discover what was originally found rather than what's reported on now. That's
right.
the difference. So if you read archaeological reports, modern archaeological reports, they will leave out the early finds or what they don't think is important. And the elongated skulls were thought of not to be important, so that was left out. So you have to go right the way back to source to find out what the first excavators found, when they found them, and what they found.
Mm-hmm. I think it would be interesting for someone to look at the distribution. I mean, you said that there's a bunch around Stonehenge and on the Salisbury Plain, and then you said that there was another, I'm going to say, cluster in the west of England.
Southwest, yeah.
You know, and is there another, I'm going to say, sacred site in that area? You know, I mean, because that's what I'm kind of wondering, if we find this practice in areas that we would find sacred sites around the world, regardless of where they are.
That's a really good point, and I think you're, in all probability, right, because where the elongated skull was found in the south west of England is an area that contains a lot of sacred sites. We must remember that in the UK, in the height of the stone building phase, there were, literally hundreds and hundreds of stone circles. 900 survive today. So there could have been thousands of stone circles originally.
That's a lot of stone circles.
That is a lot of stone circles. So that's what I mean. They were actually, in prehistoric terms, quite common. I mean, a lot of them were plowed out, taken away, destroyed over 5,000 years, of course. But to have, near enough 1,000 survive just goes to show that this was very important to our ancient ancestors to construct such monuments.
Talking to you, my brain just starts going, well, what about this? What about this? Okay, so here's another thing I'm going to throw out because my brain just snapped on it. What would be really interesting would be to map out where all of the different stone circles were both present and ones that aren't there anymore, but we knew were there, and then look at it from an aerial perspective to see if it makes some kind of interesting pattern in the surface. I was thinking about that area in France where it just has those long rows of standing stones, but we know in the UK they're circular, and it would be interesting to see if there was some kind of pattern emerged from it.
Yes, that's Carnac in Brittany, France, and they're huge long rows. They have their particular style. So yes, it would be. I mean, there has been a few maps of the major sites throughout the British Isles, but not all of the sites as such. And a lot have been lost, and we kind of, through aerial photography, know roughly where they are, so to speak. And it's a bit like round barrows as well. There were thousands of those surrounding Stonehenge alone. If you could imagine Stonehenge as a central feature of a much wider landscape, then two concentric circles, 2 miles in diameter, containing 850 round barrows surrounded Stonehenge, and only about 200 survive now. So when we look to the landscape we see with our eyes today, we're looking at just a fraction of the prehistoric wonders that were actually constructed.
That is just amazing. It makes me want to have a time machine to go back, 3 or 4,000 years just to observe.
Oh, that would be a wonder in itself. And the early antiquarians also noted, who saw more of the ancient landscape than I can, for instance, they noticed that the round barrows that surrounded Stonehenge reflected in size, perfectly so, the magnitude of the brightness of the stars above. So they felt that the 850 visible stars to the naked eye, and more besides, were encircling Stonehenge like a gigantic planisphere. But they were thinking about that in the Victorian period. And again, those ideas were shelved. They're becoming more fashionable, and researchers are looking into these concepts now, but they certainly aren't new.
I don't think we've invented anything new. But, okay, so in that one giant long barrow, you said that instead of having multiple chambers, there was just one, and I'm going to say this with a little bit of surprise, woman?
Yes.
What do you think that was about?
Yes, so this woman, she must have been deemed especially important because she is the only female single burial in the ceremonial landscape of England. So it was unprecedented. She must have been deemed very, very special to have had the most gigantic mound raised, possibly in her honor, or for her bones to be placed within the chamber of that barrow. And the really unusual thing about this barrow, which an army officer told me, actually, because like I say, this is on MOD property, the Military of Defense landscape, said to me that he found it really strange because up until relatively recently, that barrow was used by the army for tank maneuvers. So tanks with heavy tonnage were going over the top of it in an exercise. And that despite being used for that for many years, and that's recently been stopped because it's been classified as a sacred site monument, it never caved in. So they found that quite unusual, but that just goes to show the engineering and construction skills of our ancient ancestors.
Their skills never cease to amaze me. So I'm assuming that there were actually stone chambers in there and not just dirt.
No, in this is even more remarkable. No, not in that barrow, because there were no stones. It was just the layering construction of their organic layer, inorganic layer, organic layer throughout the long mound that was so well constructed that despite the tonnage of tanks going over its back, it never caved in. It still looks perfect today.
Wow. We went to one of the Native American mounds by where we live. And I don't know how it is in the UK, but I was a little shocked, to be honest. We went and I have to like touch everything and look everything and walk around the back. And, I'm sure you're the same way. But anyway, and so I'm going around because I'm trying to figure out what the footprint of the original monument looked like. And it seemed kind of obvious to me that this whole area over here was excavated, and their attempt to putting it back together to what was originally there failed miserably. How's that?
Yeah.
Do you find the same kind of thing where they've gone in and, excavated and they kind of try to put it back but aren't really good at it?
So on some monuments, that is true. And on other monuments, some of them were left unexcavated because the early excavators were doing it for one reason and one reason alone. They thought they were going to find gold. So after a while, when some monuments didn't give up the gold, like the long mounds, they gave up excavating them. So we were quite fortunate to some degree that some have been left completely intact.
That's good. And are they using ground penetrating radar to get information of what's going on, or are they just being much more cautious in their work?
Much more cautious. Whenever you can now, ground penetrating radar is used, especially in a UNESCO site, a World Heritage site. So Stonehenge, all of that area, same as Avebury, are under the banner of UNESCO. So now UNESCO demands that, you know, you use ground penetrating radar, rightly so, rather than going in and digging something up. Because once you disturb the soil, that's it. It's disturbed forever.
I mean, I think that digging to a certain extent is important, but I think if you're able to kind of make that area more finite, the better it is.
Yes, and yes, that is correct. And some of the long mounds in the UK were definitely not used just for burial. Some of them have very unusual features. For example, one long mound close to Stonehenge had the layering, the organic and the organic layering. That's a very common feature. But right in the centre was like this chimney-like structure, this cylinder shape that went right to the top of the mound. So what was going on there? I really do feel that some of these mounds have been wrongly labelled burial chambers. Some of them were used to house burial deposits in their last phase, but their original phase, I think, were more like structures created for purposes that we're just glimpsing at their real features. And some of them led to water. They had channels leading down to water. Others had channels that went into the ground.
But that seems consistent with other places that we see as being sacred sites. This connection to the water, you know, this energy and power, you know, that when people go to them. Well, let me ask you this question. So with these long barrows, do people make comments about feeling healed or feeling more mellow or some kind of, you know, emotional healing that happens to them when they go to these locations?
Well, the people that I take around, because I do tours of these ancient sites, they certainly do feel that it affects their consciousness in some way. And some people will feel they on some mounds that they feel a healing energy. Other places that it kind of activates a certain part of them, their intuitive side, their psychic side, their sense of awareness. Some people feel more of a connection to the universe and to the stars and to different dimensions and energy fields, for instance. So I feel certain barrows have different influences on people's consciousness, which is always interesting.
But I think we find that in most of the places that have been identified as quote unquote sacred sites, which I think
exactly.
is very cool.
Yes. The places that they're site upon, as I've touched before on your show, they're very special because, you know, the ancient ancestors were looking for particular patterns to match underground water with surface water was a design canon for sure.
Well, and it just makes the whole makes the whole location resonate, I guess would be the correct word, at a certain vibration or frequency that creates a mood or a tone on the surface.
Exactly, and that's what they were plotting out. And like earth acupuncture, sighting standing stones upon these energy zones to create energy fields and to probably manipulate energy fields as well. They were adept at that.
You know, our ancestors were really smart. Really smart. But let's go back to the elongated skulls. Many suggest that the elongated skull people were often royalty. Have you uncovered evidence for this?
That does seem to be the case because, like I said earlier, only the priesthood or the elite went into the long mounds, and other members of the community or society had probably just flat graves. So the long mounds are very visible. You can see them for miles. They tend to be put on areas of height, like on top of a hill or something like that, as if they're looking down on the rest of the land or looking down on their land. So it's believed that, yes, the elongated people were the priesthood or the royalty. That is for sure.
I mean, I just find that interesting because it just seems consistent around the world. I love finding consistency. And I'm just going to throw this question out. Are there any myths or stories that come from the UK that maybe talk about these elongated head people?
That's a really good question. Now, the Irish have their own mythology, as you're probably aware of, and so do the Welsh, and so do the Scottish, and it's all labelled Celtic. The English, we had what's called the Heroine of the North, and all of our ancient manuscripts, a large amount, were ransacked and burnt when the French came in 1066. So they took away our culture, they took away our ancient mythology. That's why it's just Scotland, England, and Wales that survived. The French couldn't go in there and dominate them, so their cultures were left alive. So to a certain degree, the English culture is a bit of an enigma because the local kind of myths will say there were giants in the landscape, and there was the Fae, and the Fae are like the fairy people. They're very intelligent. They're very tall. It was the Victorians that made fairies very small with wings. In our tradition, in England, it's believed that the Fae, the fairies, were like you and I. They were very tall, very sharp, very intelligent. They could manipulate time. They could take you back. And if you went in the mounds that belonged to the Fae, you could be in there for a day or two and come out. It'll be 200 years later. So they were time manipulators. So we don't really have that many English mythologies about the mounds, mainly due to the Heroine of the North, which occurred, and it was all burnt by the French around about the 11th century.
I never heard that before. I mean, obviously the Library of Alexandria, the Mayan library. The same thing happened in China. I think with the first emperor, he went and burned everything.
Yep.
There's so much of our history that is just lost. No wonder why we're so confused and messed up.
Yeah, exactly. And some people say to me that come over, but why aren't the English Celtic? Why is it just the Irish? And not a lot of people know about the Heroine of the North. Our culture was taken away from us. And not only that, during that period, to the north of England, York is a stronghold in terms of energy. It's an energetic power centre, second to places like Stonehenge and London. The people were round up and they were all killed. It was a genocide of our culture, completely destroyed in that period.
Was that considered, some kind of a power center, political center, area of great learning at one point in time, or do we not even know that?
York was, a power place. You have some gigantic monoliths there that still have survived. The Devil's Arrows, they're called, in the north of England. They are huge. It was a megalithic power center. And also during the medieval period, it was a political power center. The Duke of York was always a powerful person. Basically, you didn't mess with York because they were a political elite there. So that's why we don't have that many English myths at all. But nonetheless, in this area, it was deemed a magical area around Stonehenge, believed to be the domain of the Fae and of giants. The original name of Stonehenge, the English name of Stonehenge, because that's a Saxon German name, was the Giant's Dance. That's what the English used to call Stonehenge.
That's interesting.
Yeah. So Stonehenge was kind of placed upon it when the Anglo-Saxons invaded England round about 4 AD. So it originally was the Giant's Dance. Now, if you go to a place in the Stonehenge landscape and it's a kind of day which is quite warm, you've got a blue sky, quite rare in England, when you can have a blue sky, and it's quite warm. And I've only seen this about 4 times in my life.
All right, that's really scary. I'm never moving to England, ever.
It's if you put yourself in a particular part of the landscape overlooking Stonehenge and the atmospheric air conditions are right, the stones appear to jump up and down and dance. So it could be called the Giant's Dance for that optical illusion, or because there were giants placed into some of the mounds that surround Stonehenge.
Well, but I think when we go back far enough, giants did roam the earth. And I don't think that, the stories that we have are stories that are make-believe.
Yes, that is for sure. So I think, if we choose the English name for Stonehenge, the Giant's Dance, there are lots of clues in the mythological landscape where social history and the past bear a truth.
Amazing, amazing, amazing. I'm looking at the clock, but we have plenty of time. In your book, The Elongated Skulls of Stonehenge, you suggest that the elongated head people were annihilated. What happened?
They were. It's another strange twist to the tale, because it was noted by the early antiquarians that when they did find these skulls in the long mounds surrounding Stonehenge, that they all gave clear visible signs of being murdered. Now, it's not known if that was all at the same time or over a period of, 100 years, or did this happen around about the same time? It's thought of that it was possibly around the same time. So it looks like the elongated ones of Stonehenge were the ruling elite. Then something happened. Something happened, and they were murdered. The Neolithic queen, as I call her, that was found from that long mound in Stonehenge, she was murdered. All of the barrows that contained these elongated skulls around Stonehenge, and one that contained the most, I think it was about 30 or so murder victims, and a lot of elongated skulls, and possibly even a few artifacts that went by the by, is on a no-go area. You can't even visit that at any time of the year. So I find it quite interesting that the really amazing barrows of England are owned by the military. You can't go in there to see them. I have never seen that barrow, but nonetheless, they were murdered. And in this barrow on the Salisbury Plain that is owned by the military, it looked like there was predominantly male in that one. All the males may have been rounded up and murdered. And children didn't escape that either. But the skulls were very, very smashed of the younger children and the babies. So this was definitely either an ethnic cleansing or just a completely annihilation of a people. And then it's literally like the elongated ones disappeared. They were, I feel, hunted down and destroyed, and that's why there was a round. Maybe if they are indigenous to this planet, they were like a round skull-shaped people dominated after that. It's a very strange area in British history that has never been touched on before. It's only been touched on by researchers, well, by a researcher such as myself, and that's because I know how to look at archaeological reports. I know how to find them, because if you don't know how to find them in a huge, gigantic warehouse, it becomes very difficult to even trace down these reports. It's my archaeological background, I guess, makes it a little bit easier for me to find all of these things, because you have to get the monument, you have to match up lots of different things, yeah, to even find a box. It's very difficult. So it hasn't ever been addressed, and I'm joining dots in early stages of research to say that this is the case, but I might find in the future different reports that lead to different conclusions. But at this moment in time, I would suggest that, yes, they were annihilated.
Any thoughts on when this cleansing happened? And I mean, to me, plus or minus 100 years is really not that big of a deal. But about?
Around about 2500 BC.
So just prior to the building of Stonehenge?
The round monuments in the landscape of the UK, like the round circles, the round barrows, were probably using the archaeological timeline, which may not match anyway, but were a little bit later than the more elongated shaped structures in the landscape. If we look at the elongated structures, they are the earliest. Whether you say 10,000 BC, or 3,000 BC, they are the earliest. And it's interesting to note that the elongated ones constructed elongated monuments, such as the Cursor-style monument. And the Cursor-style monument is like a gigantic, elongated, huge rectangle in the landscape. In front of Stonehenge originally stood a 1.75 miles long, so nearly 2 mile long structure that was a rectangular, elongated shape with 10-foot walls and no entrance. Our largest Cursors monument, created, I believe, by the elongated ones, is further south in England in a place called Dorset. It's called the Dorset Cursors, and it was 7 miles long. That was a gigantic, elongated shaped monument in the landscape. What was going on there? So their monuments, going back in time, were on a huge monumental scale. And they constructed long mounds that were like elongated shape. The circular shapes were later. Whatever date you put to that, that's the sequence of events over here. So I find that the structures that they constructed, such as the Cursors monument, to be very enigmatic. What were they doing? What were they constructing? It's a fascinating subject.
Mm-hmm. Have you found... Okay, so we have this elongated skull people that are prior to 2500 BC. Do you think they are the people that were responsible for the megalithic building that was happening earlier in England, the UK proper?
I suspect so. I suspect so, because in the round barrows that were much later, that surrounded places like Stonehenge, contained all round skulls. So the early antiquarians, they had a wonderful old saying, which is very, very true, which was long barrows, long skulls, round barrows, round skulls. So it's almost like you could look to the ancient British landscape, look at the style of the monument, and instantly know who constructed it. So the round barrows were much less, sort of 2000 BC to 1500 BC. So we can in all probability, say that the elongated ones created a monumental building program throughout England. I feel that they were the designers, and they, laid out where they should be placed, and they designed them.
Well, it would be interesting. And I was just looking this up, but I can't do math in my head, so I'm just going to have to bypass this little excursion. If it actually dates back a little bit further to around 3000, 3100 BC. And the reason I'm throwing out that date is that's when we have a lot of creation narratives that start. We have the Mayan calendar starting in and around that time. We have Krishna starting the Kali Yuga around that time. We have the Jewish calendar starting around that time. And it would be interesting if the elimination of the elongated skull people, if it was a global phenomena, and if that is what brought on this new cycle of time, and I'm making like little quotation marks with my fingers.
Oh, absolutely. I mean, that's right. 3000, 3100 BC is it's a critical, time period worldwide and globally. I agree. And in all probability, that was reflected in the English landscape as well. And around that time, a lot of researchers and geologists alike say there was, some kind of global event that could have caused that. Over here for that time period in the Stonehenge area, it was a time of no growth. A lot of the monuments became a little bit tatty around that time because there was ash in the layering of the soil. So there could have been some event that was going on that caused, climatic change at that time even, is suspected.
Okay, we have 2 minutes. So the book just came out, like as we speak, the book came out. And so normally I tell people, I make the comment they can go to Amazon, but I'm guessing it has not moved through the Amazon cycle fully yet. And so if people want to get a copy of your book, where's the best place to send them?
The best place to send them is www.aveburyexperience.co.uk, and Avebury is spelled Avebury, the aveburyexperience.co.uk. And there's a shop on that site, and just click on the shop and it will come up straight away.
Okay. And let me just kind of throw this out there. If they wanted to get it from Amazon, are they able to pre-order it as it's going through the process? Is it, up there?
Well, it should be literally on Amazon in a couple of days' time. So if we exercise a little bit of patience, you'll soon get it on Amazon.
Okay. Maria, I am so excited for you. I have to tell you, I am so excited for you. This new research, I mean, your other material was already awesome, but this research, I think, is awesomer-est.
Well, thank you. I mean, it is going to lead, I feel, to the hidden history of the English landscape, and at the moment we're uncovering lots of new evidence to show, hopefully within a year or so's time, what was really going in the landscape and what the landscape looked like as well to our ancient ancestors. We're building a huge picture now of the ancient past, and I think it's going to astound a lot of people.
And I'm just feeling like what you're uncovering is just a microcosm of what we're going to find on a global level. I mean, that's just my gut feeling to it.
It's mine as well, and I fully agree.
Yay, we're on the same page. Well, Maria, I know that the music is going to be coming up here in a second, so I want to thank you so much for coming on and spending time with us.
Well, thank you for having me. It's been
okay.
great.
All right. Thanks, Maria. Bye.
Thanks. Bye.
That's Maria Wheatley. Her webpage is the averyexperience.co.uk. The book is The Elongated Skulls of Stonehenge. And then next week, we're going to be speaking with Hugh Newman and Jim Vieira about giant skeletons and the Smithsonian. So till next.
Join host Dr. Rita Louise each week at this time for Just Energy Radio.